The question hit the internet like a bolt of lightning. What does it really mean when a former duchess is told she can no longer use the title that once reshaped her life? Not in private, not casually, but officially, publicly, formally, and in a way that signals something deeper, something irreversible, inside the House of Windsor. Tonight, that question isn't just gossip. It isn't speculation. It isn't a whisper from tabloids spinning theories for clicks. It is a confirmed, deliberate, carefully worded directive from the palace itself. And the timing could not be more explosive. 5 minutes ago, yes, 5, the palace confirmed tragic news about Meghan's future. A new rule, a firm restriction, a boundary drawn by King Charles himself. And according to senior insiders, this rule doesn't just reshape Meghan's relationship with the monarchy, it redefines it entirely. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But why now? Why this rule? Why this moment? And why is the tone so unmistakably final? Before we dive into the layers of political strategy, family tension, emotional history, and brand fallout surrounding this decision, we have to start with the energy that hit royal staff the moment the announcement went live. Shock, silence, and something else. A kind of weary inevitability, as if people closest to the situation had been waiting for this to happen, even if the world hadn't. Think about it. For years, Meghan built a global identity around being a duchess, an identity that powered interviews, collaborations, charitable partnerships, and high-profile appearances. Her title wasn't just ceremonial. It was a bridge, a shield, a spotlight, a way to command attention in rooms full of world leaders, celebrities, and power brokers. Millions recognized her not just as Meghan the actress, not just as Meghan the activist, not just as Meghan the public figure, but Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. So what happens when that title is suddenly surrounded by rules? What happens when the palace, not the press, not anonymous sources, not commentators, steps in with a decision that says, this title can no longer be used the way you've been using it? And more importantly, what triggered this move? Those are the questions the world is asking. And they are the same questions the palace is refusing to explain directly. Instead, we get phrasing crafted by lawyers, polished by communications teams, and delivered with the kind of careful precision that hides far more than it reveals. But if you listen closely, if you know how to pull between the lines, you can see exactly where this story is heading. And what it suggests is that something behind the scenes has been brewing for a while. This video goes deep into that story, deeper than the headlines. Deeper than the speculation, deeper than the public statements that deliberately avoid saying what's really happening. Because what's unfolding right now isn't just about etiquette or protocol. It's not about a title printed on a pamphlet. It's not about the formalities of royal branding. It's about power, identity, trust, fractured relationships, and a royal family that has finally reached a point where subtlety is no longer enough. Tonight, we trace the exact path that led to this rule. The private tensions, the missteps, the warnings, the negotiations, the promises made and broken, and the final moment when King Charles reportedly decided that the line had to be drawn, publicly. But before we get there, let me ask you directly, do you think Meghan anticipated this? Or do you believe this came out of nowhere? A seismic shift she never expected? Because the answer to that question is far more complicated than it looks. The story begins not with the rule itself, but with a meeting, an unexpected, unplanned meeting that reportedly took place behind closed doors inside Clarence's house. A meeting no one was supposed to know about. A meeting where one name, Meghan, dominated the conversation in ways that would send shockwaves through the royal circle. And according to palace insiders, what happened in that room changed the course of Meghan's future. But before we walk inside those doors, there's something else you need to understand. The palace didn't want this rule to look emotional or reactive. They wanted it to look procedural, inevitable, calmly considered. But insiders say the truth behind the scenes was anything but calm. A document entered the room. A comment was made. A debate unfolded. And within minutes, King Charles was presented with a decision that could not be postponed. The tension in the room reportedly reached a level few insiders have ever witnessed. Senior aides were quiet. Advisors were pacing, and a hush fell over the space when King Charles finally addressed the issue directly. The air itself seemed heavier than usual, charged with anticipation, speculation, and something approaching dread. It's rare for the royal family to act so publicly on an internal conflict, especially one involving a former member of the monarchy. But this, according to sources, was no ordinary situation. Why now? Why Meghan after all this time? The answer seems rooted in a series of overlapping concerns. On one side, there are the optics. Meghan's continued use of her Duchess title in public events, interviews, and collaborations has reportedly created tension not just with the senior royal family, but with charities, media, and even government advisors. On the other side, there are questions of precedent. Allowing a former duchess unrestricted public use of a title sets a standard that could challenge the monarchy's control over how titles are granted, used, or retired. And in a family where tradition carries immense weight, even small deviations can trigger seismic consequences. Palace sources suggest that the decision was deliberate, calculated, and unavoidable from the king's perspective. It wasn't about punishment or malice. It wasn't about personal grudges or a media feud. Instead, it was about asserting the boundaries of the institution, protecting its image, and sending a message, both internally and externally, that the rules of royal engagement are non-negotiable. But as always, reality is messier than the official story. Meghan's camp, we're told, was blindsided by the timing. While the rule itself may have been under discussion for weeks, or even months, her team reportedly received the formal notification with very little warning. That moment, according to insiders, was one of shock, disbelief, and scrambling strategy. Meetings were convened with lawyers, PR advisors, and close allies to interpret the scope and implications of the new restrictions. Every public appearance, every event, every speech and interview would now require careful consideration, not just for messaging, but for legal compliance. And yet, the ripple effects extend beyond Meghan herself. Prince Harry, who has long championed his wife's autonomy and global platform, found himself caught in a delicate balancing act. Loyalty, love, family, duty, and public scrutiny all collided at once. Sources hint that conversations between Harry and Charles were tense, private, and emotionally charged. The king reportedly emphasized the necessity of the rule for the stability of the monarchy, while Harry emphasized the potential impact on Meghan's personal and professional life. The dynamic was intense. Every word mattered. Every pause carried weight. It is in this tension that the story takes its most dramatic turns. Because, while the rule itself restricts public use of royal titles, insiders hint at deeper, more personal implications. It is not just about appearances. It is about influence, power, and perception, both within the palace and on the global stage. The king, advisors, and senior aides reportedly understood that this decision could trigger media backlash, fan outrage, and even political commentary. And yet, they pressed forward, convinced the line had to be drawn. At this point, many observers outside the palace are asking, how will Meghan respond? Will she fight it quietly, publicly? Or will she adjust her strategy entirely, shifting focus to her private ventures and philanthropic initiatives? The truth, insiders suggest, is far more complex than simple compliance or rebellion. Meghan, we're told, has been considering the broader implications for months, weighing potential backlash against the necessity of maintaining influence and visibility. And the reality is that the palace may have underestimated how adaptive and strategic she can be when cornered. What is undeniable is that this moment marks a turning point. According to insiders, the 5 minutes ago confirmation was the culmination of months of internal debate, meticulous planning, and confidential consultations. Every word in the statement was crafted to convey authority, finality, and procedural clarity. But behind the polished wording lies a narrative of human emotion. Frustration, tension, anxiety, and a keen awareness that every decision resonates far beyond the walls of the palace. And yet, even as the decision was finalized, whispers of dissent began to emerge. Not from the public, not from tabloids, but from within the palace itself. Advisors questioned the timing. Courtiers debated the wording. And one or two senior figures reportedly warned that this could ignite a reaction larger than anticipated. The tension is palpable. Every actor in this drama, Meghan, Harry, Charles, Camilla, and the advisors, is navigating a minefield of expectation, history, and legacy. And here's the critical point. This story is far from over. The announcement is just the beginning. As palace insiders hint, subsequent moves, reactions, and strategic countermoves are already in motion. There is anticipation of public statements, private negotiations, and media engagement strategies that could redefine the contours of Meghan's life for years to come. The implications are not just immediate. They are structural, emotional, and deeply personal. By now, you might be wondering, what exactly does this rule mean in practical terms? Which titles are restricted, and how will it affect Meghan's participation in events, media appearances, or partnerships? And, most importantly, why did the king choose this moment to assert authority so decisively? The answers, as we will see in the following chapters, are tangled with history, politics, emotion, and strategic foresight. Each element plays a role in shaping the present moment, even as future consequences remain uncertain. So as we begin this journey into the heart of the palace, consider this. What you are about to see is more than a story of royal protocol. It is a narrative about power, influence, identity, and the delicate balance between personal ambition and institutional tradition. It is a story where every word, every decision, and every reaction carries weight. And while the world watches, the real drama is unfolding behind closed doors. The moment the phone rang inside Clarence's house, few could have predicted how pivotal the next few hours would become. According to multiple palace insiders, the call came unexpectedly, interrupting what had been described as an ordinary day of briefings, memos, and ceremonial planning. But the content of that call immediately shifted the atmosphere. A former Duchess, Meghan, was at the center of it, and King Charles needed clarity on her future role, her public image, and, most critically, the authority she continued to wield through her titles. Those who were in the room recall a palpable sense of urgency. Staff who had spent decades navigating palace protocol described the air as charged, electric, even uneasy. And while these words are often used in reporting, insiders insist that in this case, they only begin to capture the tension. It was the kind of tension that grips a room when decisions about identity, loyalty, and legacy are about to be made, and when the people making them understand that the consequences will ripple across generations. The meeting itself was not planned in advance. Clarence's house rarely hosts emergency gatherings of this nature. Yet in this instance, several key advisors, including senior aides, communications directors, legal counsel, and a handful of palace officials, were summoned at short notice. The king's schedule, meticulously mapped weeks in advance, was suddenly rearranged to accommodate a discussion that, according to sources, could not be postponed. The room was long, opulently decorated, yet the grandeur of the surroundings seemed almost irrelevant compared to the gravity of the situation. Reports suggest that King Charles entered quietly, a file folder in hand, and immediately set the tone. "We need to address the matter before it becomes unmanageable," he said. There was no preamble, no beating around the bush. Every person present understood exactly what was at stake. And yet, even with clarity, the full implications of the discussion had not yet been revealed. At the heart of the meeting was Meghan herself. Not present in person, but in every conversation, every reference, every carefully measured comment. According to insiders, Charles began by reviewing the scope of her public engagements, media appearances, and the use of her Duchess title. Advisors laid out detailed timelines, interviews, appearances at charitable events, speeches, and even brand collaborations. Each event was examined for potential impact on the monarchy, reputation management, and international perception. And as they spoke, the king listened intently, occasionally nodding, occasionally frowning, occasionally pausing to let the weight of a point settle over the room. One of the most striking aspects of the meeting, according to those in attendance, was the unusual frankness of the conversation. While palace meetings are often formal, heavily scripted, and carefully managed, this session reportedly cut straight to the heart of the issue. "We're beyond speculation," one aide allegedly said. "This isn't about perception anymore. It's about principle." That phrase, "about principle," resonated deeply in the room. It underscored the king's broader concern that the monarchy's traditions, authority, and structure must be preserved, even in the face of complex, modern challenges. But even as the advisors spoke, a deeper, unspoken tension permeated the room. How much influence should Meghan retain? How visible should she be? At what point does the use of her title cross a line from recognition to overreach? These questions were delicate, controversial, and deeply personal. No one present underestimated the stakes. It was not merely a discussion about ceremonial protocol. It was a negotiation over power, legacy, and identity. Sources indicate that the turning point came when the king opened the file folder he had brought with him. The contents reportedly included a detailed analysis of Meghan's public engagements, a timeline of her media appearances, and internal memos documenting previous discussions about the limits of royal titles for former members of the family. Insiders described the folder as meticulously organized, containing not just facts but analysis and recommendations. The presence of this document marked a shift in the conversation from speculation to action. It was at this point that a senior aide reportedly spoke up, expressing concern about the potential backlash. If we move too quickly, the aide cautioned, there could be media storms, public speculation, even international commentary. The room paused, absorbing the weight of that warning. The king's response was reportedly measured but firm. The line has to be drawn. Delay only compounds the risk. It was a statement that set the tone for the remainder of the discussion, signaling that while optics mattered, the principle of authority and control could not be compromised. Adding further complexity, sources suggest that Camilla played a role in shaping the discussion. Though not always present in every meeting of this nature, her input was reportedly sought given her experience navigating royal image and protocol. An aide allegedly referenced her opinion that Meghan's use of the title had become uncontrollable, adding a layer of urgency to the king's decision-making process. The room reportedly reacted with a mixture of surprise and agreement. Camilla's influence, subtle but decisive, appeared to tip the scales toward formalizing restrictions. Even with these internal debates, the meeting reportedly remained emotionally charged. Advisors had to carefully balance honesty with diplomacy, clarity with tact. Every suggestion, every piece of analysis, was weighed not just for its immediate impact, but for the long-term ramifications. Would imposing a rule provoke resistance? Would it be seen as punitive? Would it spark public or celebrity outrage? These considerations loomed large, yet the king's focus, according to insiders, never wavered from his primary objective: safeguarding the integrity of the monarchy and delineating the boundaries of authority. A particularly tense moment, sources say, occurred when one aide suggested that the restriction could be interpreted as a personal rebuke rather than a structural necessity. The room reportedly fell silent. Everyone understood the sensitivity of the phrasing. Public perception was always a factor, and no one wanted the rule to appear as though it was motivated by resentment. Charles, however, reiterated that the decision was about stewardship and precedent, not personal sentiment. The institution must come first, he said, emphasizing that tradition and authority would not be compromised for individual influence or popularity. As the meeting concluded, a sense of finality reportedly settled over the room. Decisions were made, recommendations were confirmed, and the framework for implementing restrictions on Meghan's use of her Duchess title was laid out. Yet, even as attendees left, there was an awareness that this was just the beginning. The ripple effects, media scrutiny, public debate, and private family tension had only just begun. And here lies the first real cliffhanger of the story. According to insiders, the information discussed in this meeting would not remain secret for long. Leaks, strategic leaks, and even accidental disclosures were reportedly anticipated. And the palace knew that once the world caught wind of this decision, Meghan's reaction, public perception, and media coverage could each spiral in ways that were impossible to fully predict. The folder was unassuming, almost banal in its appearance, a standard, tan manila folder with the royal crest stamped faintly on the corner. But insiders insist that what it contained was anything but ordinary. According to multiple sources, this document, brought into Clarence House during that secret, urgent meeting, was the catalyst that transformed a tense discussion into a moment of historical significance. It wasn't just a collection of notes or routine reports. It was, in essence, a blueprint for reshaping Meghan's entire public identity within the monarchy. When King Charles opened it, those present say the room's atmosphere shifted. There was a silence, thick and immediate, that stretched across the advisors, aides, and senior staff. The folder reportedly contained a detailed timeline of Meghan's public engagements, appearances at charitable functions, speeches, interviews, and media collaborations. But more than that, it included a meticulous analysis of how her actions, appearances, and titles were perceived internationally. There were notes on social media reactions, press coverage, and even internal memos from previous discussions about limits on royal titles for non-working royals. One insider described the folder as a mirror reflecting both the power Meghan wielded and the risks it created. The document didn't just catalog events, it analyzed influence. It assessed the financial implications of her brand, the media attention she attracted, and the ways in which her actions could potentially clash with royal protocol. It reportedly even referenced past incidents, some small, some more controversial, that suggested a pattern. Meghan's presence as a duchess in public contexts often amplified her personal brand in ways the palace could no longer fully control. As Charles reviewed the pages, he reportedly paused several times to make notes, underline passages, and glance up at the room to gauge reactions. Advisors described the king as calm but resolute, his expression shifting only slightly when he reached particularly sensitive sections. Those sections reportedly highlighted moments where Meghan's visibility as Duchess of Sussex had directly intersected with commercial interests, media attention, and high-profile interviews. In some cases, the analysis suggested that the impact of these appearances extended far beyond what the palace had anticipated, touching not just public perception but also potential diplomatic implications. The contents of the document were reportedly compiled over several months. Analysts inside Clarence House, along with communications and legal teams, meticulously tracked Meghan's appearances, calculating the influence each one had on the public narrative. They documented press coverage, noting positive and negative slants, and included detailed commentary on how these appearances aligned or conflicted with royal values and messaging. Insiders suggest that the detail was so granular that it even considered timing. The proximity of certain events to royal announcements, charitable launches, and public holidays. One aide reportedly whispered during the review, "It's like watching her every move in real time." The words, although quiet, captured the tension in the room. The folder was more than just information, it was evidence. Evidence that Meghan's public influence, whether intended or not, had outgrown the parameters the palace considered acceptable for a former working royal. And then came the section that insiders say shocked everyone. Hidden in a subset of pages, there was a comparative analysis. Meghan's public appearances versus those of other former royals who retained limited privileges or titles. The data reportedly indicated a stark contrast. Unlike predecessors, Meghan had maintained a level of visibility and influence that rivaled working members of the royal family. The implications were clear. If no action were taken, the precedent could erode the control and authority of the monarchy itself. For some advisors, this realization sparked a flurry of debate. Should the palace act immediately? Should the restrictions be gradual? Could they communicate this in a way that was diplomatic, careful, and non-punitive? The answers weren't simple. Every possible approach carried risks. Acting too forcefully could provoke backlash, anger Harry, and ignite media speculation. Waiting too long could allow Meghan's influence to grow even further, making restrictions appear reactive rather than strategic. Charles, according to insiders, weighed these options carefully. He was reportedly particularly attentive to the tone and language used in the analysis. One passage, highlighted in red, suggested that public opinion might support action, but only if framed correctly. The document recommended framing the restriction as a formal clarification of protocol, emphasizing institutional integrity rather than personal rebuke. In other words, the palace was advised to present the rule as a protective measure for the monarchy itself, not a punishment for Meghan. Even as discussions continued, the implications for Harry became clear. Sources claim he had been preparing for potential restrictions, but was reportedly unaware of their imminent enforcement. The document apparently included an assessment of how he might respond, weighing loyalty to his wife against respect for the king and the institution. This added a layer of emotional tension to the meeting. Harry's role in any potential public fallout was already a consideration, and Charles reportedly took this into account before finalizing the next steps. Another layer of complexity involved Camilla, whose counsel had reportedly been sought in advance. According to insiders, she had reviewed early drafts of the analysis and emphasized one point repeatedly. While Meghan had contributed positively to public initiatives, her continued prominence as a titled duchess could be perceived as uncontrollable. The phrase reportedly lingered in the room during the meeting, amplifying the urgency of the discussion. Advisors and aides recognized that if the king did not act, Camilla's concerns could prove prophetic. As the meeting progressed, one advisor suggested a potential compromise, a partial restriction, limiting the use of the Duchess title only for commercial ventures while allowing participation in charitable activities. But Charles reportedly rejected this, insisting that a clear, enforceable rule was necessary. Compromise, in this case, risked ambiguity, and ambiguity in matters of protocol could lead to public confusion, media speculation, and challenges to royal authority. Perhaps the most striking detail, insiders say, was a section of the document that predicted media reaction. Analysts had modeled potential headlines, social media sentiment, and the trajectory of public discussion. They concluded that some backlash was inevitable, but that strategic messaging could mitigate the worst effects. In effect, the palace had prepared not only the rule but also the framework for controlling its narrative, a calculated, comprehensive approach to crisis management. Even after the meeting concluded, the impact of the document lingered. Staff left Clarence House reportedly shaken, not because of conflict or disagreement, but because the evidence, analysis, and recommendations were so compelling that inaction seemed impossible. Everyone present understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. The rule restricting Meghan from using her royal titles and public engagements was no longer a theoretical possibility. It was imminent. And yet, as the folder was closed, a sense of unease persisted. While the document had laid out the rationale, the data, and the recommendations, it could not predict human emotion. It could not anticipate Meghan's reaction. It could not foresee Harry's response. And it could not fully measure the impact of global scrutiny. That uncertainty, insiders say, is what makes this moment both historic and deeply volatile. By the end of the day, the palace reportedly began drafting formal language for the announcement. Advisors worked to ensure every word emphasized institutional necessity, minimized personal judgment, and framed the restriction as protective rather than punitive. But as the initial drafts circulated, some aides reportedly whispered that the story was already out of control. The document, after all, had already shocked those in the room. Its revelations would inevitably leak, ignite speculation, and fuel intense media scrutiny. And so, the stage was set. The document had done more than inform a decision. It had catalyzed a cascade of consequences that were about to reach Meghan, Harry, the royal family, and the world. Its impact would be felt immediately and continue to reverberate for weeks, months, and perhaps years. While much of the attention surrounding the restriction on Meghan's royal titles focuses on King Charles and his advisors, sources inside the palace reveal that Queen Camilla's role was far more significant than most outsiders realize. Her influence, subtle but decisive, shaped the tone, urgency, and ultimate direction of the decision. Far from being a passive observer, Camilla reportedly brought historical perspective, strategic foresight, and a keen awareness of public perception that few in the room could match. And according to insiders, one comment from her allegedly shifted the entire conversation. To understand her influence, it is important to recall Camilla's history within the royal family. She has spent decades navigating the delicate intersection of public scrutiny, media narratives, and royal protocol. From early controversies to her eventual integration into the monarchy, Camilla has learned how to balance personal presence with institutional expectation. Advisors describe her as both pragmatic and perceptive, someone who can identify potential conflicts long before they erupt publicly. Her counsel is often sought not just for content, but for tone, how to act, when to speak, and when silence can carry as much weight as a formal declaration. On the day of the meeting at Clarence House, Camilla reportedly participated via video link. According to insiders, she had been briefed on Meghan's recent public engagements, the compiled document detailing her appearances and influence, and the preliminary discussions about potential restrictions. Her initial comments were measured but pointed. She allegedly emphasized that while Meghan had contributed positively to charitable causes, her visibility and the way she leveraged her Duchess title had grown beyond what the institution could comfortably manage. The phrasing reportedly caused a ripple of unease in the room. Advisors and aides, many of whom were already concerned about the implications of restricting Meghan, realized that Camilla's opinion carried weight precisely because of her track record. She was neither reactionary nor vindictive. Her perspective was grounded in strategy, precedent, and an acute understanding of how royal authority functions. When she described Meghan's title as uncontrollable, according to sources, the room collectively recognized that the king had to act decisively. Camilla's influence was not limited to words alone. She reportedly provided a framework for evaluating Meghan's public behavior in context. For example, she highlighted the differences between working royals and former royals, emphasizing that the line between visibility and overreach is often blurred. Using past examples of other former royal family members who maintained titles without causing controversy, Camilla illustrated how clear rules could prevent confusion, misrepresentation, and potential damage to the monarchy's reputation. Her approach, insiders say, combined both strategic foresight and emotional intelligence. She acknowledged that Meghan's popularity in certain circles, particularly in media, philanthropy, and celebrity communities, was significant. But she also warned that popularity alone could not justify unrestricted use of a royal title, especially when such use might conflict with institutional priorities. According to sources, she framed the restriction not as punishment but as a preemptive measure. "We are not restricting a person," she reportedly said. "We are protecting the institution." Interestingly, Camilla also addressed potential backlash. She reportedly predicted that if the restriction were implemented without clear messaging, it could be portrayed as punitive or personal. She emphasized the importance of careful wording, strategic timing, and proactive engagement with media channels to shape the narrative. Her guidance apparently influenced the language ultimately used in the official communication that confirmed Meghan's restriction. Another aspect of her influence, according to insiders, was her ability to anticipate emotional responses within the family. Camilla was reportedly the first to consider Harry's likely reaction. She emphasized that while Harry's loyalty to Meghan is undeniable, he is also deeply conscious of his public image and responsibilities as a senior royal. Her counsel reportedly helped the king frame the rule in a way that acknowledged Harry's position while maintaining the necessary boundaries. Sources suggest that Camilla's perspective also carried weight because of her credibility with senior aides and courtiers. Unlike some advisors whose influence is procedural or technical, Camilla's authority is rooted in lived experience. She has been the subject of intense scrutiny herself, navigating public and private criticism, personal controversies, and the complex dynamics of a family constantly in the spotlight. Her advice, therefore, is often considered both empathetic and realistic, a rare combination in palace decision-making circles. Moreover, Camilla reportedly offered a historical lens. She reminded the group that titles, privileges, and protocols are not static. They evolve based on precedent, context, and necessity. She cited examples from royal history where failure to enforce clear boundaries resulted in confusion, public criticism, or challenges to authority. Her framing suggested that the restriction on Meghan was not an anomaly, but part of a broader tradition of safeguarding the monarchy. Despite her strategic clarity, insiders emphasized that Camilla's intervention was not universally welcomed. Some aides reportedly worried that emphasizing Meghan's influence as uncontrollable risked framing the discussion as personal rather than institutional. Others feared that invoking history could make the decision seem overly bureaucratic, alienating the public and media. Yet, Charles reportedly listened attentively to every point Camilla raised, weighing each one against the document, the ongoing discussions, and his understanding of Meghan's potential reaction. Camilla's influence, however, went beyond analysis and framing. She is said to have subtly shaped the emotional tenor of the meeting. By acknowledging Meghan's contributions, popularity, and charitable efforts, she softened what could otherwise have been perceived as a harsh, punitive discussion. Her commentary reportedly reminded attendees that decisions about protocol are often complicated by genuine human achievements and relationships. In other words, she humanized the process without undermining the necessity of the rule. By the end of the meeting, multiple insiders claimed that Camilla's input had been pivotal. Not only did her words reinforce the king's inclination to formalize restrictions, but they also helped shape a plan for implementation that was strategic, legally sound, and publicly defensible. Her insight into timing, phrasing, and potential media reactions reportedly influenced the final draft of the rule, ensuring that it would emphasize institutional necessity rather than personal criticism. Yet, even as the king and advisors moved forward, there was an awareness that Camilla's framing was only part of the equation. Meghan's response, Harry's loyalty, and the global media landscape remained variables beyond the palace's full control. Insiders note that while Camilla's influence helped guide the immediate decision, it could not predict subsequent reactions, leaks, or the broader public narrative. And here lies the first cliffhanger of this chapter. According to sources, after the meeting ended, a private message was sent directly to the king from an unexpected source. The content of that message reportedly introduced a new complication, something even Camilla's foresight could not have fully anticipated. The implications of that message would ripple through the palace, Meghan's camp, and the media landscape in ways that no one in the room could have predicted. The palace announcement that Meghan would face restrictions on using her royal titles and public engagements was framed carefully, almost clinically, a matter of protocol, a clarification of institutional boundaries. But insiders paint a far more layered, complex picture. At the heart of the decision wasn't just formal tradition. It was a battle between perception and reality, between what the public sees and what the monarchy knows behind closed doors. And this battle, according to multiple sources, had been quietly escalating for months. From the outside, Meghan's public persona seemed almost untouchable. Charismatic, media-savvy, and globally recognized, she had leveraged her Duchess title to command attention, amplify charitable causes, and maintain visibility in a way that few former royals have managed. Her speeches, interviews, and appearances created a ripple effect that often dominated headlines and social media trends. Yet, according to palace insiders, this perception didn't always match the realities within the institution. One source explained that while Meghan's visibility was impressive, it created a tension between external influence and internal compliance. In simpler terms, what Meghan projected to the world sometimes conflicted with the monarchy's needs, timing, or messaging. Every high-profile appearance, every exclusive interview, every partnership she engaged in could potentially disrupt the carefully constructed image of the royal family. For those inside the palace, this wasn't about personal disapproval. It was about maintaining control over narrative, consistency, and hierarchy. And that is precisely what made the restriction necessary, insiders say. The palace had watched, analyzed, and measured Meghan's engagements for months. Reports were compiled not only to track media impact, but to examine how the Duchess title was being leveraged. According to the confidential documents that circulated internally, Meghan's use of her title in public forums sometimes amplified her personal brand more than her role within the institution. Advisors argued that if left unchecked, this dynamic could erode the authority of the monarchy and create confusion about where responsibility, influence, and accountability truly lie. This is where the tension between reputation and reality became critical. Publicly, Meghan remained a figure of admiration for many, a symbol of modernity, compassion, and charisma. Behind palace doors, however, her actions raised questions about precedent, fairness, and boundaries. If Meghan, a former working royal, was allowed unrestricted use of her title, what would prevent others from doing the same? How would the monarchy ensure that titles retain the prestige, authority, and significance that centuries of tradition had established? Sources suggest that advisors framed these concerns explicitly for King Charles. They reportedly presented scenarios illustrating potential long-term consequences, other former royals seeking similar privileges, commercial enterprises leveraging titles for profit, and media narratives that could inadvertently challenge the family's authority. Every scenario highlighted the tension between Meghan's public perception, global acclaim, influence, visibility, and the monarchy's internal reality, the need to safeguard hierarchy, protocol, and institutional control. Compounding this tension was the question of timing. Meghan's recent public engagements, insiders say, were unprecedented in scope for a former royal. High-profile speeches, collaborations with celebrities and activists, and media appearances during periods of sensitive family events amplified scrutiny. Every action was magnified, every detail analyzed. According to advisors, this led to a growing consensus that a proactive restriction was necessary, rather than waiting for a misstep or public controversy to force the issue. Another critical factor was the interplay of trust and precedent. For decades, the monarchy has relied on a combination of tradition and discretion to manage former royals. Titles, privileges, and ceremonial roles are tools that communicate both authority and limitation. Insiders explain that the unrestricted use of a title by someone no longer a working royal could be interpreted as tacit permission for influence, access, or media leverage that the palace was not prepared to grant. The new rule, therefore, was as much about preventing misinterpretation as it was about controlling public perception. And yet, this was not a decision taken lightly. Sources insist that the king and senior advisors were acutely aware of the personal and emotional dimensions of the restriction. They knew it would impact Meghan, Harry, and the broader family dynamic. They also anticipated the inevitable media reaction, public debate, and social media commentary. But in weighing these consequences against the institutional necessity, the balance tipped decisively toward action. It is in this context that the so-called real reason behind the restriction emerges: control over narrative, authority, and perception. While the public-facing rationale emphasizes protocol and boundaries, insiders stress that the deeper concern is influence. The palace recognizes that Meghan's brand, amplified by her Duchess title, carries weight not just in charitable circles, but in global media, business partnerships, and political contexts. Left unchecked, this influence could undermine the careful equilibrium the monarchy maintains between tradition, visibility, and authority. The distinction between reputation and reality becomes even clearer when considering Meghan's recent statements and initiatives. Publicly, she projects engagement, advocacy, and independence. Internally, the palace's analysis reportedly flagged several points where these actions, while admirable in isolation, intersected with titles, privileges, and public expectations in ways that could challenge authority. Advisors reportedly warned that perception without oversight could create confusion, dilute the significance of titles, and invite speculation about favoritism or inconsistency. Even Harry's role added complexity. While deeply loyal to Meghan, he remains a senior royal with responsibilities, visibility, and obligations. Advisors reportedly weighed Harry's position heavily when crafting the strategy for the restriction, understanding that his reaction would influence both public perception and Meghan's subsequent decisions. According to sources, discussions included contingency plans for Harry's potential public statements, private negotiations, and media appearances, all aimed at maintaining family cohesion while enforcing the rule. One particularly sensitive aspect of the discussion revolved around global media perception. Meghan's influence is international, and the palace reportedly recognized that any restriction on her titles would be scrutinized globally. Advisors examined how media outlets, public figures, and social commentators might frame the decision, predicting arguments about fairness, equality, and modernity. The solution, according to insiders, was to present the restriction as procedural and institutional, not punitive, emphasizing the need to uphold tradition and clarify boundaries. Yet, even with careful framing, there was recognition that the human element could not be controlled. Meghan's response, Harry's emotional reaction, and the court of public opinion introduced variables the palace could not fully anticipate. The tension between reputation and reality, in other words, was both institutional and deeply personal. It was about protocol and influence, but also about relationships, loyalty, and perception. The chapter closes on a cliffhanger because, according to insiders, the moment the restriction was formally drafted, a new variable emerged. An unexpected revelation that threatened to complicate implementation. The information reportedly came from a confidential source close to Meghan, indicating that she might respond in ways the palace had not planned for. The announcement had barely left Clarence House when word reached Meghan and Harry. Sources suggest that, for the couple, the reaction was immediate, visceral, and intensely private. Unlike the carefully curated public composure that Meghan often displayed in media appearances, the first moments of awareness behind closed doors were raw, emotional, and filled with a mixture of shock, anger, and strategic calculation. According to insiders, it was a reaction that the palace itself had anticipated, but only partially. Inside their residence, Meghan reportedly gathered her closest advisors and legal team almost immediately. Phones buzzed, emails were exchanged, and messages were encrypted, all in a flurry of activity to understand the scope of the restrictions, the exact language of the official communication, and the potential implications for her upcoming public engagements. She was furious, but precise, one source said. Meghan's instinct in moments like this is to analyze, plan, and strike back in the smartest way possible. Harry, meanwhile, reportedly balanced his own frustration with a protective instinct. Loyal to Meghan but aware of the delicate nature of their relationship with the monarchy, he was in a position few could envy, defending his wife, preserving his own public role, and navigating the optics of a situation that could quickly spiral into a global media story. According to insiders, he was tense but focused, working alongside Meghan to coordinate messaging, consider potential responses, and evaluate legal pathways. Despite the intensity of the private reaction, the couple reportedly maintained public calm. Sources describe a meticulously calculated approach. They continued scheduled appearances, engaged with charitable initiatives, and communicated through official channels in ways that did not reveal personal outrage. Every public action, according to insiders, was deliberate, an effort to control narrative, project composure, and buy time while they assessed their options behind the scenes. The tension, however, was palpable even to those inside the palace. Sources claim that courtiers and advisors monitoring the couple's movements noted subtle changes, increased private meetings, heightened communication with media contacts, and careful vetting of all outgoing statements. These actions suggested that Meghan and Harry were not merely reacting emotionally. They were preparing a strategic response, calibrated to protect influence, reputation, and legal standing. One source described a particularly charged private meeting within the Sussex household. Meghan reportedly reviewed the timeline of her public engagements against the newly imposed restrictions, highlighting events that might now conflict with the palace's rules. Harry, she insisted, needed to be aware of potential points of contention, both for appearances and for broader influence. According to insiders, this meeting lasted several hours, punctuated by intense discussion, debate, and a shared determination to maintain agency despite the imposed limitations. Interestingly, sources suggest that Meghan's reaction combined emotion with precision. While she was reportedly frustrated by what she saw as an overreach, she simultaneously recognized the strategic opportunity to define her own narrative. By maintaining public calm, she avoided immediate backlash while preparing a longer-term response that could protect her brand, charitable influence, and international presence. Advisors note that this dual approach, emotional private response, controlled public image, is a pattern Meghan has followed in previous controversies, demonstrating both resilience and media acumen. Harry's role, insiders say, was equally complex. Known for his loyalty and protective instincts, he reportedly wrestled with multiple pressures, defending Meghan, respecting the monarchy, and safeguarding their shared public image. Sources suggest that he acted as a stabilizing force, mediating discussions, coordinating legal advice, and ensuring that Meghan's public engagements could continue within the bounds of the new restrictions while signaling strength and composure to the global audience. The couple's private fury, however, extended beyond procedural concerns. According to insiders, there was a deep sense of personal frustration, rooted in the perception that the restriction was not merely about protocol, but also about control. Meghan reportedly questioned why the palace had chosen this moment, why previous discussions had not resulted in mutual understanding, and why her influence, long acknowledged in charitable and public circles, was suddenly framed as a threat. Harry, in parallel, reportedly felt that the king's decision risked undermining trust and family cohesion, adding an emotional dimension to an already complex situation. Despite these tensions, the Sussex team moved with strategic discipline. Sources suggest that lawyers, communications advisors, and media consultants were all engaged to evaluate next steps, draft potential statements, and anticipate public reaction. Every action was measured against multiple criteria: legal compliance, public perception, media framing, and potential backlash. The couple's approach reportedly reflected a balance between assertiveness and caution, ensuring that immediate reactions did not create long-term vulnerabilities. Another source emphasized that Meghan and Harry were acutely aware of the palace's broader objectives. They recognized that King Charles and senior advisors sought to reinforce authority, clarify precedent, and assert boundaries. By understanding the institutional goals, Meghan and Harry were able to plan a response that maintained dignity, avoided direct confrontation, and preserved influence while signaling independence. This strategic awareness, insiders insist, is what separates this reaction from a simple emotional response. It was calculated, deliberate, and forward-looking. Even as they maintained public calm, the couple reportedly engaged in private communication with allies, media contacts, and supporters. Sources suggest that these communications were carefully crafted to protect their narrative, emphasize fairness, and ensure that their perspective would be understood once the story reached public consciousness. By controlling messaging behind the scenes, Meghan and Harry were able to manage the initial shock while setting the stage for subsequent actions, including public engagements, statements, and strategic media appearances. Yet, despite all planning, insiders note that there was an element of unpredictability. Meghan's influence is global, Harry's visibility is high, and the media landscape is fast-moving. Even the most carefully constructed strategies are vulnerable to leaks, misinterpretation, and rapid amplification. According to sources, this unpredictability was acknowledged in every discussion, reminding the couple that while private fury could be channeled strategically, the potential for public disruption remained significant. By the end of the first day following the announcement, sources indicate that Meghan and Harry had established a private strategy, maintain composure publicly, coordinate responses internally, and prepare for potential escalation. Advisors described a sense of controlled tension, with both spouses fully engaged in managing the implications of the palace's decision while safeguarding their own agency and influence. And yet, the chapter closes on a cliffhanger. According to insiders, an unexpected development occurred within hours of the restriction being formalized. A leak, small but significant, reportedly reached international media outlets, hinting at Meghan's restricted status before the palace's official statement could fully circulate. The leak, sources suggest, was enough to ignite speculation, trigger online debates, and prompt preliminary coverage that set the stage for what would become a public storm. The moment news of Meghan's restricted use of her royal titles leaked, the media erupted. What had begun as a meticulously calculated decision within the walls of Clarence House quickly became a global story, dominating headlines, social media feeds, and broadcast news cycles. According to insiders, the palace had anticipated scrutiny, but the intensity and velocity of the reaction far exceeded expectations. Within hours, journalists across the world were dissecting every nuance of the announcement, speculating on motive, and debating the implications for Meghan, Harry, and the monarchy itself. The initial reports were cautious, emphasizing institutional necessity and protocol. Headlines read variations of "Palace clarifies rules for former royals," and Meghan to face restrictions on public titles. But within moments, commentary shifted from procedural explanation to narrative framing. Analysts, commentators, and influencers on both sides of the debate began exploring questions of fairness, gender dynamics, and media strategy. Social media, as insiders predicted, became a pressure cooker, amplifying speculation, criticism, and support in equal measure. According to multiple sources, Palace communications teams immediately mobilized to manage the narrative. Press officers drafted clarifying statements, engaged in private briefings with key journalists, and monitored the rapid spread of information online. Every message, insiders say, was vetted for tone, phrasing, and potential public reaction. The goal was to contain misinformation, reassure supporters, and maintain control over the unfolding story. Yet, even with these efforts, the speed of the media cycle proved challenging. The leak, though relatively small, had already seeded interpretations that could not be fully retracted. Public reaction was polarized from the start. On one hand, loyalists to the monarchy praised the move as necessary, framing it as a step to reinforce protocol and protect the institution. Articles in prominent newspapers highlighted the historical precedents for restricting titles, emphasizing the distinction between working royals and former royals. Supporters argued that maintaining clear boundaries is essential to preserve respect, authority, and consistency within the royal family. On the other hand, Meghan's global fanbase and many media commentators interpreted the restriction differently. Social media platforms lit up with accusations of unfair treatment, gender bias, and punitive intent. Hashtags supporting Meghan trended internationally, while opinion pieces questioned whether a former duchess should be subjected to limitations after marriage and motherhood. Insiders note that this duality of reaction created a volatile environment, forcing the palace to navigate both praise and criticism simultaneously. Journalists quickly began analyzing patterns in Meghan's public engagements, citing the leaked document and media reports to suggest that the palace's action was not just about protocol, but about influence. Headlines ranged from Meghan's titles curtailed amid rising royal tensions to palace enforces new rules on Duchess's public role. Analysts highlighted her recent speeches, philanthropic work, and visibility in international forums as factors that likely contributed to the decision. The narrative, intentionally or not, suggested that Meghan had become too prominent, too influential, and too independent for traditional royal structures to tolerate without formal boundaries. Television networks also jumped on the story. Morning shows, primetime news, and talk shows dissected the decision, featuring interviews with royal commentators, former staff, and journalists with inside knowledge. Insider sources report that some of these segments aired speculative predictions about how Meghan and Harry would respond, how public perception might shift, and what this meant for the king's authority. The speed and intensity of coverage created what insiders described as a feedback loop, where media speculation further fueled public discussion, and public discussion prompted additional media coverage. Social media, in particular, proved to be a battlefield. Platforms such as Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok exploded with content, ranging from supportive commentary to criticism, memes, and viral threads analyzing every facet of the announcement. Analysts monitored engagement metrics, noting record levels of interaction with posts about Meghan, Harry, and the palace. Insiders claim that the sheer scale of this response surprised even the most seasoned communications professionals within Clarence House. The global reach of Meghan's influence, combined with the immediacy of online discussion, created a situation that was unprecedented in its speed and intensity. Interestingly, insiders report that some media coverage was shaped by selective leaks and carefully placed commentary from sources within the palace. Whether intentional or accidental, these disclosures framed the narrative in ways that emphasized institutional necessity, authority, and precedent, subtly influencing public perception. Analysts suggest that these tactics were designed to mitigate backlash while reinforcing the rationale for the restriction. Yet the strategy carried inherent risks, as media interpretation is often unpredictable and minor details can quickly become headline news. International media reacted with equal intensity. Newspapers and broadcast networks in North America, Europe, and Asia reported the story, frequently contrasting Meghan's current status with previous royal figures. Commentary often centered on the evolving role of women in royalty, the tension between tradition and modernity, and the challenges of managing former working royals with global influence. According to insiders, the palace closely monitored international coverage, aware that global opinion could impact domestic perception and long-term reputation management. Amid the frenzy, palace advisors reportedly debated whether to issue a second, clarifying statement. Some argued it would quell speculation and reinforce authority, while others warned that further communication might inadvertently amplify the story. Ultimately, Charles opted for restraint, trusting the initial messaging while relying on internal strategy to manage media interactions, briefings, and potential leaks in the following days. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's team reportedly observed the media reaction closely. Sources suggest they were both surprised and validated by the speed of coverage. The global attention, while intense, also reinforced their perception of influence, underscoring why the palace's restrictions were both necessary and, in their view, strategically significant. Advisors note that the couple used the media storm to inform subsequent communications, engagement planning, and strategic outreach, carefully calibrating actions to protect both image and impact.